This is the deadliest swimming hole in America, and almost nobody who jumps into it has any idea. Underneath that perfectly clear water sits a cave system divers call a grave, and it has swallowed several lives in the most horrifying ways.
Jacob's Well, a popular swimming hole near Wimberley, will remain closed to swimmers for the foreseeable future.
Scientists just sent another underwater drone down into the deepest chamber, and they immediately regretted it. It found a strange glowing light nobody can explain. Bodies positioned in ways that looked deliberate, almost like something had arranged them there. What exactly is hiding down there? Stay with me until the end, because you are about to uncover the most dangerous secret this well has ever kept. The trap beneath the oasis and everyone it already took. Every single summer, hundreds of people race to Jacob's Well and hurl themselves straight into the water without a second thought. They scream, laugh, and cannonball off the rocks. But what none of them realize is that they are jumping straight into the open mouth of a killer. The Jacob's Well is a real, documented monster hiding in plain sight in the Texas Hill Country, and it has already swallowed lives. Just picture the Cypress Creek cutting through the small town of Wimberley, Texas, looking so calm and beautiful. But inside that creek bed sits a hole, dark, round, and barely 12 feet wide. That hole is the Jacob's Well, and the second you slip beneath its surface, the trap snaps shut around you. The water is a perfect 68 degrees all year round, so clear you can see every rock at the bottom. And that clarity is exactly what makes it so deadly, because it perfectly tricks you into believing nothing down there could ever hurt you. Now, here's the truth. Jacob's Well is not even a well to start with. It is a karstic spring, a vertical cave that drops straight down into the Trinity Aquifer, an underground river system that runs for miles beneath the hills. Most tourists just splash around in the first 30 feet and call it a day. But for scuba divers, that sunlit room is only the doorway. Below it, the real well begins, and divers have a brutal nickname for what waits down there. They call it a diver's grave. But why would anyone call a swimming hole a grave? Because the cave beneath it is a maze of at least 4 chambers, and every single one drops deeper and turns deadlier than the last. The passages connecting these chambers have names that sound more like threats than a well's chambers. The squeeze between the second and third chamber is called the birth canal, a gap so tight a diver has to twist and force their body through it. Push further, and you reach passages divers name the coffin and the final squeeze. Nobody names a hole in the ground after a coffin, unless something inside it earned that name in blood. But the real killer here is not even the depth, it is the floor. Every chamber is coated in a thick layer of fine limestone powder that is soft as flour. One careless fin kick stirs that powder into the water, and in seconds, the entire chamber turns into a thick, milky blackout. Divers call a silt out. Just picture being trapped in total darkness, unable to see your own hand, unable to find your gauge, unable to find your dive buddy, and worst of all, unable to find the line that was supposed to lead you back to the surface. Panic floods in, breathing speeds up, air burns away twice as fast, and the well claims its next victim. But how many victims has it exactly claimed? Here is where the story gets really dark. Officials say 8, maybe 9. But locals who have lived beside this water their entire lives swear the real number sits closer to 12. So would the official count be so far off from what the community believes happened in their own backyard? Hold that thought, because we are coming right back to it. After watching too many young divers vanish, authorities decided enough was enough. So they welded a heavy iron grate across the entrance to the deeper chambers, certain a wall of steel would finally end the bloodshed. It did not. Divers crept back at night, armed with bolt cutters, tearing the grate open again and again. No matter how many times the well was sealed, somebody always found a way to rip it back open. It was almost as if the well wanted them to keep coming back. The very first confirmed death struck on a blistering summer day in 1964, when 2 young men named Eddie Cantrell and Ken Hamilton slipped beneath the surface and simply never came back. When a diver finally went down to bring them home, he found their gear bags and logbooks sitting exactly where they had left them on the surface, untouched. Then, deep inside the final passage, he found something that still chills people decades later. Both of their underwater lights were still burning, glowing steady in the dark, 8 full hours after both men had already died. As if that horror was not enough, an unverified but widely repeated story claims a third victim, a woman, drowned in the years that followed. After her death, a local diver tried to take control of the lake. He started demanding certification from willing divers and charging them a small fee. He even banned alcohol and smoking on site, all in a desperate attempt to make the place survivable. But the diving community turned on him fast. "You don't own this water," one furious club member reportedly snapped at a meeting. The rules collapsed within a year, and almost the instant they fell apart, the well dragged down another victim. Then came November of 1983, when a 22-year-old advanced diving student named Richard Patton, a young man his own instructors praised as extremely skilled, made one wrong turn deep inside the cave with no line to guide him home. He burned through his last breath of air in total darkness, alone before he passed away. Patton's death proved something the well had already been screaming for decades. This place never cares how trained you are. It kills beginners and experts with the exact same hunger. You would think a death toll like this would scare people away for good, but it did the exact opposite. A free diver named Diego Adame once pushed deep into the system, chasing the thrill everyone talks about, and lost a flipper in the dark water. With no way to kick properly and his air dropping fast, he ripped off his own weight belt just to stop himself from sinking further into the black. Adame later admitted the only image in his head at that very moment was his own death staring back at him. He clawed his way out alive. Plenty of others never got that second chance. But Jacob's Well is not just a cursed swimming hole. It directly feeds Cypress Creek and acts as a living window into the Trinity Aquifer, the same underground water source that millions of people rely on for drinking water. So, when scientists pushed to study what was happening inside, this was never simple curiosity. This was about protecting water an entire region depends on to survive. And here is something most of the families splashing around today have no clue about. This well that looks like it has been here forever and will be here forever has actually stopped flowing completely more than once. It dried up first in the year 2000, then again in 2008, 2011, 2013, and 2022. The aquifer feeding it is being drained dry by the people living above it. Everyone jumps into this so-called paradise chasing the perfect photo. But what they do not see is the slow death happening right under their feet. The water is dying. And so are the divers brave enough or foolish enough to go deeper. Due to this high death rate among divers, scientists finally drew the line. No more human lives would be gambled, exploring the deepest, most feared corner of the well. Instead, they built a machine for the job, a small, bright yellow drone tough enough to survive crushing pressure, and armed with cameras and sonar strong enough to map the cave without risking a single human heartbeat. The plan sounded simple on paper. Send the drone to the 4th chamber and build the first complete map this cave has ever had. By the time anyone ever dreamed of sending a machine into this water, the well already carried 15 years of silence and bones beneath it. But there was one name it had been hiding longer, and more famously than any other, and that little yellow drone was about to drag it straight into the light. The drone's discovery and the night the well took to. When the drone dropped through the 1st chamber, sunlight was still dancing across the rock walls at 30 feet. Then the light vanished completely. At 80 feet, the water turned a deep, suffocating indigo, and the drone's own light snapped on, slicing a narrow path through total blackness. It forced its way through the birth canal, crawling slowly and carefully so it would not stir the silt waiting beneath it. It broke through into the 3rd chamber, which was wide and dead silent, almost like the cave itself was holding its breath. Then the operator pushed the drone toward a small black crack at the far end of that chamber. This was it. The entrance to the 4th chamber, the point almost nobody who enters ever crawls back out of. The walls slammed in tight around the machine, and the floor turned into a shifting, hungry bed of loose rock. The drone's light caught something that was not stone at all. A single scuba fin stood frozen, straight up out of the gravel. Beside it sat a corroded oxygen tank with its regulator crusted shut, and a torn scrap of black wetsuit hung on a jagged shard of limestone. Then the camera found the thing nobody in that van was braced for. Tucked inside a crevice, half swallowed by shifting gravel, lay human bones. A faded name tag still clung to a strip of the wetsuit. The team enhanced the footage frame by frame until a name finally burned clear on the screen. The room went cold. This was not some unknown diver. This was one of the most infamous disappearances this well had ever swallowed. Then just moments later, the camera drifted further down the passage and found something else waiting in the dark. Another set of remains, resting in almost the same kind of gravel, almost the same kind of silence. A second man the well had taken and never given back. But here is something most people never learn about this story. In real life, these two bodies were not actually found by a robot first. Human cave divers from a mapping expedition found them years earlier, which means real people once swam face to face with the bones of two men who died chasing the exact same passage they were trying to explore. Let that sink in for a second. Imagine swimming through total darkness and your light suddenly landing on the remains of two people who never made it back. What happened to the second body makes this even darker. One of the two men was never deliberately pulled out at all. The well itself, using nothing but raw water pressure, forced his remains out in 1981, a full 2 years after he died, almost as if the cave grew tired of holding what it had taken. The second body was not recovered until the year 2000, meaning he lay buried in that gravel for 21 straight years. 21 years. Long enough that some of the very divers who eventually found him had not even been born yet. But to understand how two young men ended up trapped in that exact spot, you have to rewind back to the night of September the 9th, 1979. Cave diving back then was reckless and wild, packed with young divers desperate to be the first ones to reach places no human has ever reached. Kent Maupin was one of them. He was fearless to the point of madness and completely obsessed with conquering the legend of the fourth chamber. His friend Mark Brashear, still a college student, idolized him and followed him almost everywhere he went. That night, they were camping out with a larger group of 8 divers when Kent and Mark decided that tonight was the night they would finally claim the deepest point anyone had ever touched. Now, here is the part that should terrify you. They carried no extra lights and brought no safety ropes. They never even ran a single guideline behind them, the one tool that could have shown them the way home in total darkness. Worse still, both men tore their own air tanks off their backs and dragged them backward through the narrow tunnel behind themselves, fully committing to going deeper with absolutely no plan to ever signal anyone if disaster struck. A diver named Joe Moy trailed behind them and watched the entire nightmare unfold with his own eyes. He saw Kent and Mark shove their tanks into the narrow black opening and vanish completely. Desperate, Joe slammed his dive knife against his own tank, which was the universal signal screaming danger through the water. But nobody answered. With his own air running dangerously low, Joe had no choice left. He aimed his light into the black hole like a final flickering prayer and turned to fight his own way back up. The instant Joe broke the surface, the entire well flipped from crystal clear to a thick, choking brown in seconds, right before his eyes. He did not need anyone to explain what that meant. He already knew. "They're gone!" he screamed to the others on the bank, his voice cracking apart. "They're still down there!" Police were called immediately, and the call went straight to a man named Don Dibble, a local dive shop owner and former Navy diver known across the entire state as the best deep water rescuer alive. Dibble, his partner Paul Battaglia, and 2 volunteers tore off toward the well the second they heard the news. To make an already brutal night even worse, one of the other divers in the group dove twice back to back, trying to find Kent and Mark, surfaced convinced he had already glimpsed their bodies half buried under fresh gravel, and ended up crippled by decompression sickness from pushing his body far past its breaking point. Dibble stood at the edge of that black water and stared into it like it was staring right back. "We go in blind right now, we lose more than 2, he told his team flatly. It was too dark, the water was too silty, and the risk was too high to send anyone in without daylight, so they would have to wait. Waiting for sunrise turned out to be the easy decision, because what happened the very next morning would nearly turn Don Dibble himself into the well's next victim, and what followed after that would spiral into one of the strangest, most public disasters Texas diving has ever seen. The recovery that became a second nightmare. At 10 in the morning, Dibble's team hit the water ready for war. The first divers carried nothing fancier than small garden trowels, with which they scraped away at the gravel, blocking the passage one handful at a time. It did not take long for the horrible truth to surface. Every single foot of gravel they cleared away slid right back down to bury the space again. The well was not just hiding the bodies anymore, it was fighting to keep them. Furious and out of options, Dibble made a decision nobody saw coming. He decided to go in himself, pulling a local game warden named Calvin Turner in for backup. They staged spare tanks at 25 feet and 75 feet on the way down, running safety lines behind them the entire way. At the mouth of the fatal passage, Dibble checked his gauge one final time and discovered that 10 minutes of air was all he had left. Just enough to search and crawl back out. Or so he believed. Dibble pushed his head and shoulders into the narrow black gap, and in one heart-stopping instant, the entire gravel wall above him gave way and crashed down on top of him, burying him alive and triggering a total blackout silt cloud around his body. Dibble's arms were pinned tight to his sides, so he could not even bang his tank to call for help. His air was bleeding away fast, and his mind was slipping toward darkness. In that final, terrifying second, Dibble made a decision that still sounds insane today. Rather than thrash and burn through what little air remained, he opened his mouth and drank the filthy water around him instead of fighting it. But just as he braced to let go completely, his body fought back on its own. A violent, involuntary jerk tore him loose just enough to move. And luckily for Dibble, Calvin Turner had seen the silt bloom and swam straight in without hesitation, holding out a spare air hose. Dibble grabbed it and ripped a breath into his burning lungs. He was alive, but the nightmare had only changed shape. While drowning in panic, Dibble had swallowed a massive amount of trapped air. And as he and Calvin clawed their way toward the surface, the dropping pressure caused that trapped air to expand violently inside him, exactly like a balloon swelling as it rises. By the time Dibble broke the surface, his stomach had stretched out so badly he looked 9 months pregnant. The pain that followed, he said later, was beyond anything words could describe, and it tortured him for 12 straight hours. Doctors at Brooke Army Medical Center first assumed decompression sickness, so they locked Dibble in a recompression chamber, but the pain refused to fade. It took fresh x-rays to finally expose the real horror. His stomach wall had ruptured completely inside his body, triggering a deadly infection called peritonitis. The surgeon who cut Dibble open later compared it to slicing into a fully inflated basketball. It was a 1 in a million injury. So, surviving it was nothing short of a miracle. And while Dibble fought for his life in a hospital bed, the recovery pushed on without him. A diver named Don Broad went down next and found Kent Maupine's dropped light still glowing faintly in the gravel, like a tiny dying star in total darkness. Don told the grieving families the only way to bring their sons home was to strip the gravel away from the top, layer by brutal layer. So, the families hired a commercial outfit called Schaefer Diving Company, who brought in a recompression chamber and a massive industrial suction hose, and started dragging tons of gravel out from 60 feet down, only to watch the well swallow the space back up every single time. Then the money started running out, and that is when things turned really ugly. The dive company's manager stood at the edge of the creek and held a press conference that shocked everyone watching. "You have 24 hours, he announced to the cameras, or this well gets sealed shut with your son still inside it." He then called the trapped boys putrefying human remains in front of grieving parents, and even demanded $20,000 immediately, even though officials had already confirmed the water itself was perfectly safe. The standoff grew so tense it reached the governor's office and the staff of 2 sitting United States senators. It eventually took a state senator personally guaranteeing the company's bill just to buy 1 more day of searching. As if turning 2 dead teenagers into a public ransom demand was not disturbing enough, locals actually showed up at the creek with folding chairs and beer and treated the body's recovery like free entertainment, while the boys' own families hid away in a hotel in San Marcos, too broken to watch. Meanwhile, some of the victims' own friends were even caught sifting through the shallow creek bed, hunting for gemstones the suction hose had dredged up from below. It was heartbreak on one side of the water and a circus on the other. Then, a company named Brown and Root came in to give one last professional opinion, and their answer matched everyone else's. The recovery was too dangerous because the gravel bed was a moving, living grave that refused to release what it had taken. So, 12 days after Kent and Mark vanished into that tunnel, the search was officially called off for good. The well was sealed again, this time with thick concrete and a fresh metal grate, meant to be the final word on the entire tragedy. The concrete and steel grate were supposed to end the story of Jacob's Well right there and then. But they came nowhere close, because sealing the entrance did absolutely nothing to seal the questions swirling around it, silence the legends growing out of it, or stop the well from quietly guarding exactly what it still refused to give back. What the well still won't give back. The drone footage finally answered the one question that had haunted this place for decades. It proved, beyond any doubt, that the fourth chamber is a living, breathing death trap built entirely out of shifting gravel. But proving how people died down there did not explain everything still swirling around Jacob's Well. And what happened after the sealing might be just as disturbing as anything found underwater. For starters, the resort that originally owned Jacob's Well, called Wood Creek, collapsed into bankruptcy in the aftermath of the tragedy. And for a stretch of time, the most dangerous dive site in the entire state of Texas legally belonged to absolutely nobody. And divers exploited that exact gap to keep slipping back inside. At one point, someone even ripped a protective cover clean off the entrance and jammed a handwritten note in its place, which read, "You can't keep us out." That defiance was not just stubbornness either, because modern cave divers have since mapped a main passage stretching roughly 4,500 feet, with a second branch reaching another 1,000 feet beyond that. In other words, the four chambers everyone has heard about for years are only a small slice of a system that, even today, has still not been fully explored. Doesn't that completely change how you see this place? A cave that massive, sitting mostly unmapped beneath a public swimming hole, with whole sections is still totally unknown to anyone alive. That drags us straight back to the death count nobody could agree on earlier. Officials count 8 or 9 confirmed deaths. Locals swear the real number sits closer to a dozen. Now, think about everything you just learned. Bodies sitting hidden for 21 years. A corpse the cave itself spat out using nothing but water pressure. A cave system stretching far beyond anything originally mapped. Is it really so hard to believe the true number is higher than anyone has ever officially admitted? Beyond the cold, documented facts, this place has carried its own legends for generations, and the drone's discovery only poured gasoline on them. The oldest legend claims the well has no bottom at all, that it drops straight down toward the center of the earth itself. The drone mapped the known chambers for sure, but it only mapped what divers already knew was there. Nobody can swear there isn't more hiding, past that final squeeze, waiting in the dark for the next person brave enough or foolish enough to look. Then there is the belief that the well itself is somehow alive. Long before any of this bloodshed, Jacob's Well stood as a sacred gathering place for Native American tribes, and many believe that history left behind something that still lingers in the water today. To be fair, specific tribal stories from that era have mostly faded with time, so claiming more detail than what actually survives would be dishonest. What we do know for certain is that divers who came close to dying down there often describe the exact same feeling, a pull dragging them deeper, almost like the well wanted them to keep going just a little further. From there, the theories only grow wilder. Some believe something undiscovered lives down in the still largely unexplored Trinity Aquifer, hidden in total darkness where no human body could survive for long. Others go even further, insisting the well sits on some kind of energy vortex, or even a thin tier between our world and somewhere else entirely. The theories sound far-fetched for sure. But remember, this is a cave system science itself has still not finished exploring, and that gap is exactly where these stories thrive. Maybe there is no creature lurking in that black water. Maybe there is no portal hiding beneath the gravel. But here is what we do know, without a single doubt. Nobody can agree on how many people this well has actually taken. And somewhere out there, right now, somebody is breaking into Jacob's Well again, chasing the exact same pull that has already cost so many lives before them.